Welcome to Peer Check. I'm your host, Adam Keating, and today we're talking about the playbook for adopting cloud technologies for engineering leaders and IT leaders trying to work in the manufacturing industry. I'm joined by security expert Robert Percy. Robert is CoLab's VP Security and IT and has dedicated his entire career to figure out how to secure some of the most important software technologies out there. From fighting financial crime at Verafin to helping secure a multi-billion-dollar project, and even starting probably the biggest local security conference, B-Sides, here in St. John's, Newfoundland. Robert is one of a kind. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Robert, I got to go back to the basics, and I asked you this when I interviewed you a couple of years ago, but why security? Like, why do you care so deeply about this to even get into it in your personal life?
Well, I've been interested in security for a long time, and part of it started way back when I was in university. I living with a group of people and a group of guys. We all had an apartment, and trying to share the internet back when the cable modems were a thing, and we brought in a cable modem, and so I set up a little home network, to share the internet. You weren't supposed to, but we won't say anything about that. And but we shared it across everyone that was in the house. And at the time I knew very little about internet security. I dealt a lot with hardware. Been dealing with hardware my entire life. Writing various bits of code for hardware and stuff, but never really dealing with like internet and network security. And so anyway, we set up this network, and it was one of the things with back then, the cable modem was kind of open to the internet back then. It was like a shared thing, right? And, everyone was kind of like on this whole local network. And we had a printer set up, and somebody accessed the printer. And so I started looking and digging, and, me just being the curious person that I am, like I have to figure out why. I always had to figure out why. Dig deep, right? And I got to know why. So what was going on? And so I dug into it, started looking at the logs, implemented like a little firewall on the thing, and then started looking at the logs, and I'm like, oh my Lord, like this is getting nailed. And like, it terrified me. Like you actually get that sinking feeling. You're like, what the hell is happening? Like people are just hammering this thing. So this is back in like, what is it? Like 1997, 1996, somewhere around there. And, I was like, this is terrifying. So I started learning and, understanding how this stuff works, and, implemented my own, little firewall that was there that protected the network for the house, and just started going from there. And I've always been interested in security. A lot of it, I started my career in application development. So I was doing a lot of software development, desktop software, web application software. And with that, having that experience of, having somebody poke at your home network, your home, PCs, all that stuff. I was like, this is crazy. Like we're putting this stuff on the internet, web applications, and, there's very little consideration for security. So it's been a part of my career. Even though like the majority of the early part of my career was in software development, it was secure software development. It was always taking into consideration the what if, what's going to happen. And a lot of software now is still developed with that mentality of, we're creating this product for people to use, and here's how they should use this product. Here's how we expect them to use this product. I always flip it and turn around and say, well, what can we do with that product? Right. And it doesn't matter how it's supposed to be used. It's how can we use it? And we take advantage of it. And, so that's personal interest. It started back then with, securing my own personal stuff, and it's like it now at home. Ever since we've had internet at my house, I've had enterprise grade security in my own home for as long as I can remember.
I'm glad that someone hacked your printer. I don't know if it would have ended up crossing paths had your printer not gotten hacked. So obviously we talked like a lot about the shift to the cloud. And I know like when we started CoLab 5 years ago, the cloud was almost like a dirty word. Like it was, people balked at it from a security perspective. I remember interviewing you, 2.5 years ago, and you had a fundamentally different perspective of the cloud. Why is the cloud important from a security perspective for companies to be considering today?
Yeah, a lot of it is around the management of infrastructure. A lot of companies still have this perception that on-prem is more secure, and it kind of evolves into what you and I talk about a lot, which is risks, perceived risk versus real risks. And there is a perceived risk with cloud because they feel that they don't have the same control that they have with on-prem. Neither is more secure or less secure than the other, right? It's an on-prem infrastructure can be made secure or it can be not secure. Cloud can be made secure or it can be not secure. It all depends on the implementation. And it all comes down to configuration. And the vast majority of breaches are still based on because of misconfiguration. And so companies still have this idea that having things on-prem, they have full control because it's physically there next to them in a data center and they have full control over it. Meanwhile, they have their servers that are sitting on the internet. They're not patched. They've got wide open networks with no segregation. They have poor security controls for their endpoints. Pathway straight in to get to their data. But these same companies are the ones that say, well, we can't put our data in the cloud because it's not secure. And it's wrong. It's a complete misperception. There's also this it goes both ways too. There's perception too that cloud is more expensive. And then there's also this perception too that cloud's cheaper. And that's not always the case either, right? It all boils down to business case and business use and what your appetite is. But the main reason for moving to the cloud is a lot of it is just the management infrastructure. It reduces the need for having on-prem infrastructure, the costs associated with that, the maintenance of the hardware, the maintenance of the software. All these services are taken care of for you. You still have to take care of your security. You don't offload security. You never do. It's still your responsibility.
You said something about maintenance a second ago, and I know from my perspective, when I talk to engineering leaders and then they bring in their IT groups, the main reason they seem interested in moving this direction is the overhead of their current on-prem system is almost unbearable, and they're crippling under their own weight. So you said stuff like, things remain unpatched. I think it's not because they don't realize it's unpatched. It's because they literally can't get to it because there's just too much overhead. And we've seen lots of high-profile on-prem security breaches in the last year, like tons. How do people get comfortable with the cloud vendors like AWS and Azure? They're doing like an incredible job of how they secure the infrastructure. The more important part then is how is the application built on top of that? Like how do you build that? How do people get comfortable? Like from a place of discomfort with cloud to saying, okay, I trust Amazon, I trust Microsoft, I trust the vendor. What steps should people take to get comfortable?
Yeah, the biggest part is education. Honestly, it's like everything. It's educating yourself on what these service providers have to offer, what their platforms have to offer, what their options are, what their native security solutions are, and what you as a consumer can bring in to put on top of those native security solutions to bolster that security to make it even better. And again, it's really truly educating yourself on what they have to offer. Look at their compliance, look at their auditing, look at what certifications they have. Are they ISO 27001 certified? Do they have their SOC 2? It's building that trust based on education.
That makes sense. And like you started with talking about risk, and I think it's something we talk an awful lot about. Give me some examples of what the real risks are versus like the really perceived risks, because I hear a lot of the perceived bucket, and I think a lot of the real one is often left behind, in particular when we look at security questionnaires. We'll get to that after. But give me an example of some of the things that are like truly real risk versus the perceived ones that are holding teams up today.
Yeah, I mentioned the perceived risk that on-prem or let's say cloud is less secure because it's not in the same location. It's not physically next to me. Therefore, I have no control, and that's not true, right? You still have control of your data. You're still the data owner. You're still the ones that manage those systems. And when it comes to a SaaS solution, there's a trade-off there where us as a SaaS provider, we're the ones that take that data. We're the ones that are now responsible for that data, for the security of that data, and making sure that we have the controls in place. So that's where education comes in. You ask us what we're doing to secure the data. But in general, when it comes to cloud, just there is that misperception, right? That cloud is insecure, and it's not true. And like I said, cloud can be as secure as you want it to be, and we've seen it. We have major government entities with the most secure data possible that are using cloud infrastructure because they have the controls in place to guarantee that is secure. If you don't do that, then it's the same as anything else. It can be the same as an on-prem situation where you have this server that's sitting on the internet that nobody knows about, and it's unpatched and wide open to the internet, and it's a perfect pathway in. It's no different. So that's a very common one. There's another misconception too around data sovereignty. That's one that we see all the time with customers. They feel that they're, let's say they're in the US, the data center is in Canada, therefore they can't use it because, they have data sovereignty. Their data has to stay in the US. And that's not true. It's the same with Canada. Like, so we have, let's say customers in Canada, and there's a data center in the US, and they say, well, we can't use that service because the data center is in the US. And again, that's not true. There are considerations for data sovereignty, especially when it's government. There are, depending on the classification of data, yes, certain piece of data, they have to stay within the geographic boundaries of that country. But in general, when it comes to a company, there are companies that just feel that because I'm a US company or because I'm a Canadian company, I have to use US or Canadian data centers. And that's not true. And the reality is that your data goes cross borders continuously. Every second of every day, there's data going across the borders. So that is a common misperception. So that one is around education. Again, just understanding, because there's no legal obligation for it. It could be a company policy, sure, right? And then that's up to the company, but it's not a legal thing, unless you're dealing with data that actually specifically has data sovereignty issues. When it comes to like a real risk, misconfiguration, honestly, that is an absolute real risk. We see it all the time. Again, is one of the number one sources for a data breach right now is misconfiguration of cloud services. So like in AWS, you have what are called S3 buckets, right, which are data storage. It's like file shares, basically. And it is so easy to have those sitting publicly on the internet. And companies just, a lot of times they implement these without proper education, without proper knowledge. They don't know how to secure them. So they end up with an S3 bucket that's sitting on the internet with copies of personal data, medical records, and we see it all the time. It's, there's news headlines all the time. A researcher found X number of records, medical records, in a publicly available S3 bucket. The same goes for servers that are sitting on the internet. Misconfiguration in, containers, servers, whatever infrastructure you have sitting on the internet, misconfiguration. It's it. And again, the vast majority is, that's a real risk. And same with patching. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean that it doesn't need to get patched. It still needs to get patched. The benefit of cloud is that depending on the level of service that you're using, it's the responsibility of either the cloud provider or like us as a service provider. It's our responsibility to patch the infrastructure and not the customer. So.
I'm curious, like on that front, like that's a lot of the technical side of this. What about the human front? Like one of the things I hear the most, and I think is like the biggest irony in security, is that most people I will talk to have very stringent security requirements, oftentimes for things that I think you and I would both classify as a perceived risk. They're putting the emphasis in the wrong spot. The thing that they're not focused on is the people side. And I'm talking to an engineering leader. They're telling me that they're sending their most valuable IP through their email to a supplier. Like your email is basically open to the internet. Second you do that, it's gone. It's left your boundaries. There's no control, no audit log, no record. Yet they're giving me a hard time about some other security control, which really has no meaningful impact.
And that is 100% true. Yeah, they're focusing on asking us, if we've got, NIST certifications or, and it's like, when you start digging into it and ask the questions, it's like, well, how do you transfer your data now? And it's like, well, we, create a PDF document or a PowerPoint or an Excel, and then, we email it to the vendor. And it's like, right, the email is not secure. Right? At the end of the day, email was never, ever designed to be a secure method of communication. It never was. The protocols that are used are not secure. It is completely open, and it can be basically every touch point on the internet that an email message hits along the way, that message can be read. Every single point. Whatever attachments are there can be obtained, the messages, whatever information you put in there. So once that email leaves your premises, like your computer, once that email goes, you have lost complete control of the data that was in that email and any attachments. It's gone. So by design, email is not secure.
Yeah, and it's like the funny part about the email part is we'll then often hear the second part of the question is if they're not using email as an FTP or we use our PLM or we use some other tool. The trouble is most people go outside of that. Like We've seen it time and time again. And
Absolutely.
The touch points on the internet gives me the hairs of my arms stand up because it's scary. Like
most people really don't understand. Yeah, and basically, I say this a lot when I'm talking to other people, other customers, or whenever I'm providing mentorship and guidance to various companies, and it's always around data, and it's always I have to say to them, you have to ask yourself just some very simple questions. Do you know where your data goes? So where does your data go? Where does your data exist? And when you're sharing that information, whether it's by email, through your PLM solution, FTP, whatever, when you're sharing that information, you have to ask, can I prevent someone from sharing, forwarding, uploading, redistributing, printing, copying, doing whatever? Can you prevent somebody from doing that with your data? If the answer is no, then you have lost control. It's gone.
Well, like on that front, like we've talked a little bit about why cloud matters, risk in general. How does someone actually evaluate this risk when they're looking at a new vendor like a CoLab or like any other cloud tool? Like what should they be asking, looking for in these questionnaires and evaluations? What should they, rely on the SOC 2 or an audit report for, and what should they just ignore? Like, how do you think about properly? Because you've looked at hundreds of tools for us. Like, what's your process for figuring out, is this a good piece of software that we can trust to use?
Yeah. A lot of it starts again with education, and this time it's educating yourself on that company, on that product, and start by looking at what they have publicly available to you on their website. One of the things that's always a red flag for me is if I look at a company or a particular solution and their security information is not immediately available on that website, that's a bit of a red flag, because it's why aren't you telling me about your security? If they have do they have a privacy statement on their website that talks about specifically how our data is going to be used in that application, how it's treated, how it's managed, how it's secured? If that information is not immediately available, it's kind of companies should be proud of their security. If they're protecting our data, they should be proud. We are. I'm very proud of our security and our security program. We put a lot of effort into it. And this is one of the reasons I love talking to customers so much, because I am so proud of what we do to protect our customers' data that I love talking to our customers about it. So others should do the exact same thing, right? Look for the information, look for the red flags, and start asking those questions. And definitely educate yourself on what they have in a compliance perspective. So SOC 2, it's pretty much like an industry standard. SOC 2 type 1, type 2. Get the report, read through it. Those reports, they are long, yes, but there's typically a kind of like an executive summary at the beginning that will be very short, very to the point of, either this company did or did not meet all the requirements of the objectives that were defined. If there's any exceptions that are defined, go look at them, find out what they are, find out how to handle them. That's, there's lots of companies that are going to have exceptions. The biggest companies in the world have exceptions for SOC 2. Sure, it happens all the time. It's all about how they handle that situation, right? Did they identify it early? If they identified it early, what were the corrective measures, right? It's the companies that they don't identify them. It's the auditor that identified it, and there were no corrective measures that were put in place. Those are the ones that you had to be concerned about. So SOC 2. SOC 2 is a wealth of information that you can learn. Definitely talk to the security team. Once you've got that information up front, talk to the security team. Find out what their security program is like. The SOC 2 will tell you all about the technical controls, all the people controls, all the various methods that they have for software development, those kind of things. But it won't really talk about the people in the security team. So ask the questions, right? What kind of security team do they have? For example, like for us at CoLab, we have what I would consider a very multidisciplinary security team. We don't have like very specialized people that only do one function. It's very multidisciplinary. We have people that can do security operations, security monitoring, alert monitoring. We have, certified penetration testers that are on our team, that they test the application continuously. We have risk and compliance people that handle all the management of our risk and compliance. So it's very broad knowledge. So get to understand their security team and what they do. I think is incredibly important.
One thing I'm curious on, because like the first two parts, I'm assuming some people do the website. Most people in big companies at least ask for, do you have SOC 2? Whether they read the report or not, it's a different question, but they at least ask. The third part usually doesn't happen though. The third part usually is fill out this questionnaire.
I know, and it's hard.
How do you get around that, right? Because I think the questionnaire is potentially helpful for checking boxes, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've actually understood what is the solution. Who am I working with in business? Like, how do you start to spur, thinking about this from like an engineering leader perspective, how do you convince your IT team that I should get on the phone with Robert Percy for a half hour? Because every call I've ever been on with you, the IT team always ends up leaving stoked. But like, they don't always want to go to that meeting. Like, how do you convince them to say, take the 30 minutes, it'll save you 2 weeks down the road? Like, what's the way to do that?
Yeah, well, part of it is just that a lot of it is a time saver. IT teams, security teams, they're busy. So, phrase it and frame it in that regard that, we can talk to these people for 30 minutes and answer all the questions that could be weeks back and forth. That's one little thing. But the main thing is with any of these solutions that you're looking at, it's recognizing that the IT and security teams are there to be your business partner. This is one of the things that I've told you right from day one when I started, is that security to me is a business partner and a business enabler. We have to work together with the business to make sure that we do things smoothly and correctly. And part of that is, going to them not with the approach of saying, we're going to buy this solution. I need you to look at it. Here, do this. Right? That's not a good partnership approach, right? It's start by talking to them. They're good people, right? They're friendly people. There's always exceptions, of course, but they're me being one. But there's always they're good people, and they want to do things right. At the end of the day, IT and security people, that's what they're concerned about, is making sure that we do things right. And it's important for them to understand what the business requirements are. So you as you're engineering, you're coming down, you're saying, I'm looking at this. Tell them that, what, I've identified all of my business requirements. This solution is a perfect fit for my business. There's going to be a business value. Tell them what the business value is. What is it going to save? And most importantly, you're going to tell them, look, I have looked at this. Here's my problem that I'm trying to solve, right? Everything's all about a problem. What are you trying to solve? If you can't describe the problem that you're trying to solve, then you shouldn't be going for this conversation in the first place, right? It's start with the problem. Tell them what the problem is. Tell them what this product does, how it fits and solves that problem. And here's all of the functional requirements that we need, and they solve all of it. Start with that. They will then go, oh, this sounds like a really great product. I can see that it's going to provide real business value. Awesome. I think we should definitely look at this. Then you start the conversation.
I was literally that was exactly where my mind was going, because when I talk to, engineering managers, directors, VPs, and you talk about cloud tech, a lot of them haven't bought a lot of cloud technology yet. They're starting to think about it. So when you ask them, I say, hey, Joe at X company, how are you going to get this tool implemented? They usually don't know. And if they do, it's a little fuzzy. I think what you just said was really important, like starting with the requirements, the business value, business case. But what else should they package into almost like that introduction to this technology? Like you talked about websites and SOC 2 reports, like what's the appropriate way to go to Robert Percy and say, hey, Robert, I've got this product I need for XYZ reason. I'd like your help in evaluating it. What else would be helpful for the IT team to get in that first pass to instill confidence that this is actually worth their time?
Yeah. Honestly, one of the biggest helps is we've talked about how, as a team, we look for that security website. We look for the security reports. We look for the privacy. We look for the terms and conditions. We look for all this information. If you come with all that information ahead of time and say, we're looking at this solution, but hey, by the way, I know you guys are really busy. So I've already reached out to them. I've already gotten their SOC 2 report. Here's a copy of their, like we do like a sales helper, like a PDF document that's like a summary of our security from our webpage. Send that along. Start bundling in all this information that they need. Give them that information up front. They will be so appreciative of that. They will love it. And they'll say, oh, like you've just done so much of my work for me. This is great. Like, it's awesome. Yeah, it's be their friend.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is like a little bit of proactive partnership goes a long way from like the engineering leader's lens, and then from the IT leader's lens, which is the second part. I think it's a little bit of the education lens. It's understanding, what is that risk? What are they trying to do? Taking a broad perspective. Like, give you an example. I spoke to a Fortune 500 company yesterday. We were talking about how CoLab actually was the first like startup that they implemented inside of their PLM ecosystem. Like where I would call it their core critical business functions. That's a big deal, right? Like that's a scary spot to make a mistake. But now that they've done that, the confidence of the IT group has grown to say, okay, we know how to do this and evaluate this. Now we have a bit of a playbook for actually implementing these tools. What would be your advice to someone that's in an IT role who is like interested in looking forward and thinking about cloud and the rest, but maybe their peers aren't quite there? Like, how do they start building a little bit of that internal energy and excitement and education to say, yes, we need to think about doing this slightly differently? Because different means change means risk. Oftentimes people, run away from that. Like, how do you get that going from the IT front if it's not already part of your culture?
That's a hard one, to be honest, because a lot of this it's going to be a real struggle for someone in, let's say, in the IT team to try to work up to try and convince that cloud is good. That's going to be a real struggle, and I've seen it many times not work. It's failed. The best intentions are there. We've got, let's say great people coming into the security team or IT team. They know the value of cloud, what it can bring, savings for people time. We talked about the management of infrastructure. You shift this stuff to the cloud. A lot of that stuff is taken care of for you. That's one of the things that is important is just outlining what the benefits are. And IT people tend to very focus on the technical side of things, right? So they'll focus on, with the cloud, we can have the newest technologies, or we can have, the newest hardware. But once you start to go up, like, that doesn't matter as much, right? It's like, you talk to someone, let's say at our level about, the newest, latest, Lenovo server. It was like, what we have there is, most of these servers have a 5-year lifespan. So the thing has been in there for 3 years. We've got 2 years left on it. That's all we're concerned about is, it still works, right? We can still patch it. We can still maintain it. It's still good, but they're looking for the latest and greatest. So don't talk about the technology. Talk about, again, the business value, right? And the savings that we're going to have from a financial perspective, because everything at the end of the day boils down to finance. It's money, it's financial risk, it's business risk. Starting to shift things to the cloud, you start to remove some of that risk. right? It's, that 5-year life cycle on hardware, for example. Don't talk about it in the way of, we're getting the latest and greatest, fastest hardware. It's like, no, we no longer have a 5-year life cycle on hardware that we've got to keep into our budget. That's gone because that's their hardware now, right? Is we don't have to include that in our budget. We don't have to maintain that. That's gone. We don't have to have the people that are, racking the servers and doing it and switching it out and installing the software and all that stuff. It's, you need to get away from the technical and start to work up. But honestly, the best approach for getting cloud adopted into any business is to make it an initiative from the top down, right? You have to start taking this cloud first initiative and you bring it down. And then once you start showing that support from the top, that's when the people down in IT, they get so excited, right? Because they're looking at it and going, this is great. Cloud is something that I've always wanted to be involved in. Now the business is telling me that I have to. They get so excited. And that's when things start to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it firsthand. A couple of years ago, there was a Fortune 100 company that I was trying to work with and get CoLab into. Great business case, problem solved, solution that made sense, but ultimately got stuck because of cloud. A year or so later, the leadership had changed in this company, and the new leader came with a very cloud first mentality of saying we are going to do we're going to do business in a smarter way and not just the way we've always done it. And I remember getting the phone call from the IT group saying, no, we're interested in evaluating this. And I was kind of like, what? I was like, you guys hardcore shut this down. And fundamentally, I asked what changed. And the person told me leadership changed. And they're now allowing us to do what we thought made sense in the beginning. And that was like, it's such an enabler too, because man, the knock-on effect in that particular company has been, it's showing in the public. Like in the public sphere, you're seeing the way their products are being built, being more intelligent, more secure, like just like really, really cool to see that type of enablement from the top.
It really helps with morale too within like the IT, knowing that they're able to not stick with, 10, 20-year-old mentalities and technologies within their group. Like they're no longer kind of, pushed down to say you have to work with what we have here. As soon as you start saying that, you can now go and yeah. the new things, right? And people, they get so excited, and it really helps with morale. It keeps people excited, and it makes them want to do their job and do it better.
Yeah, I think like we've talked about a lot of important things on this episode here, where we're getting into like why the cloud, how to look at risk, how to think about talking to one another about implementing this. But one of like the core threads of this whole conversation has been education, and I know it's something you invested a ton in, whether it's books or online or training or whatever. But if you're an IT or security leader, what steps can you take to educate people in a way that doesn't feel like you're just screaming, go read security documentation, like a way that actually feels like, okay, I want to learn this for my own personal benefits. I think that's your personal motto. I know I've heard you say it before, but what do you do that's sort of different than most to say education is actually like an interesting thing for the broader masses? I don't mean just security team. I mean like, an engineer who's never thought about security, or someone who just came straight out of school and has never heard about, a cyber attack. Like, how do you make that interesting and something people want to invest in?
Yeah, a lot of times it's kind of seeding the thoughts. It's just showing and sharing little tidbits of information. Like you say, it's not, sending them some article or some book or something saying you should read this. It's, taking some piece of information out of that, some really core piece of information, and say, this is a really great piece of information. Or, maybe it's some cyber attack, some exploit that you might think is interesting. I do this with the developers a lot in the development team, share information on how a certain attacker was able to exploit some vulnerability, and this is how they did it, and share that with them, and it gets their mind thinking, right? It just flips that switch to say, wow, that's really, really cool technical thing that you just told me about, of how this exploit was done and how they're able to, take advantage of this vulnerability to get data out. And they start thinking, wow, this is really interesting. I love this. And then they start, you see that interest, you see the thoughts. And the same goes with, like on the business side, when I talk to basically anybody within the business, it's always taking it from their perspective and sharing those little tidbits of information, seeding that thought and those, ideas with what I know that they are interested in. Because I take a lot of time to learn about every single person in the company. It's one of the things that I've done since I started right here was every single new employee, I sit with them alone, one-on-one for an hour, and I talk to them. And I learn about them. I learn about their hobbies. I learn about their history. I learn everything I can about them in that hour to understand them, because then I can understand what their interests are, what their passions are. And I take that and, maybe this is me doing my own social exploitation of people's vulnerabilities, but I use it for my advantage, right? And that's what I do. I take things at their level and I learn about them, and I can put their own personal spin on all these different ideas and thoughts to get them interested in security from their perspective, how this impacts them in their own part of the business and how it impacts them in their personal life.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, and the underlying piece of that is the education is about two things really. One is about partnership, like it's not just me throwing you something; it's me bringing you along for a journey. And two, it's like an incredible amount of thinking about communication skills.
100% communication.
Yeah, like you could send me the same article two different ways. One way I'm not going to read it. The other way I probably will open and take a lesson from it. And I think what you said about grabbing the nugget that's relevant and contextualizing it for somebody is where most people don't go, right? Most times it'll be do this mandatory training program that takes a long time and feels like it was just thrown at you versus like I've gotten much more value, I think, from our security program in things that are like tangentially happening to me. And then when it comes up in my own life, I'm like, okay, shit, like this is real. I read about this. And like, how do I actually behave? Like I think about all the phishing emails and like things that we like now see our employees sharing, right? Like our employees share it because they learned something and now they're doing it. I think that's where it like really gets to be special, I think. And it's the same for customers. I think it's the same for working with customers. So no, that's awesome, man. I totally agree. So I think, key takeaways here. Cloud is an option for sure. It's more about how you implement.
Absolutely. Cloud is a perfect option. It's a very viable option. And you know what? The cloud platform, for the most part, is irrelevant whether you choose AWS, Azure, Google, IBM, Oracle, doesn't matter. It's just pick one and be good at it.
Yeah, it's how you do it. It's how you educate. It's how you partner. It's how you think about, understanding your risk as a company. And ultimately, it's more about the how and not is it literally in the cloud or not. So, Robert, I really appreciate the time, the insight. I'm going to appreciate the next 10 years of building with you as well. But thanks so much for the time, and I look forward to the next chat.
I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again and kind of keep a theme going. I think it'll be great.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.